Breaking tonight, an ultimatum at the White House. North Korea back down or feel the full wrath of the U.S. military. I'm Molly Line, and you're watching The Fox Report. That warning coming late this afternoon after a meeting between President Trump and his national security team. The meeting in response to North Korea's test of a hydrogen bomb. We have Fox team coverage with Congressman Brad Sherman, Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. But first, Fox News correspondent Rich Edson is live from the White House. Rich.
Good evening, Molly. And President Trump meeting this afternoon with his national security team to discuss yet another milestone in North Korea's weapons development. Since March, the Trump administration has been warning North Korea that all options are on the table. And this afternoon, the president was asked, as he was walking across the White House in Lafayette Square at St. John's Church, if he plans on taking the military option.
Mr. President, will you attack North Korea?
So the president saying there, we'll see, to the question, will you attack North Korea? Meanwhile, the diplomacy continues. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson calling his South Korean counterpart this morning, according to the State Department. The White House says President Trump spoke with Shinzo Abe, the Japanese prime minister. According to a White House readout of that call, it says, quote, President Trump reaffirmed the commitment of the United States to defend our homeland, territories, and allies during the full range of diplomatic, conventional, and nuclear capabilities at our disposal. Tomorrow, the U.S. and allies have requested an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. It's scheduled for 10 a.m. Russia and China signed on to last month's Security Council sanctions. And while both governments condemned North Korea's latest nuclear test, neither government appears willing to allow additional sanctions on the Security Council. If so, the United States and allies can pressure North Korea with sanctions outside the United Nations. Appearing earlier this morning, the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin hinted that the U.S. is considering that option.
I am going to draft a sanctions package to send to the president for his strong consideration that anybody that wants to do trade or business with them would be prevented from doing trade or business with us. We are going to work with our allies. We'll work with China, but people need to cut off North Korea economically. This is unacceptable behavior.
Late last month, the Treasury Department did sanction and enforce penalties against several Chinese and Russian firms for conducting business with North Korea. That is an option that the Treasury Department can take, along with trying to enact more sanctions and work with Congress. Molly, back to you.
Rich Edson from the White House, thank you. Let's go now to national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin. She is at the Pentagon. Jennifer.
Molly, South Korea's National Security Council just announced that in the wake of North Korea's nuclear test, its F-15 bombers and medium-range missiles practiced at dawn this morning, striking North Korea's nuclear facility at Punggye-ri. After a 3-hour national security meeting at the White House today, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis was chosen to deliver the message.
We have many military options, and the President wanted to be briefed on each one of them. Any threat to the United States or its territories, including Guam, or our allies, will be met with a massive military response, a response both effective and overwhelming.
The kind of war plans the U.S. has drafted for North Korea would not require a large buildup of military assets or personnel in the region. Most of those assets are already in place. The United States flew some of its most advanced warplanes in bombing drills Thursday with allies South Korea at the end of 10 days of semi-annual war games. It was the first time that B-1B bombers from Guam were joined by stealth F-35 jets launched from Japan. The use of B-1 bombers, which can drop 168 500-pound bombs, were chosen as a clear warning after North Korea launched a mid-range ballistic missile designed to carry a nuclear bomb over Japan earlier in the week. It did not deter the North Koreans from carrying out a test Sunday believed to be 5 times bigger than the bomb the U.S. dropped on Nagasaki. South Korea's chief presidential security advisor said they had discussed with the U.S. moving more nuclear-capable assets to the peninsula. Quote, we decided to discuss deploying the most powerful strategic assets of the U.S. military that enable us to neutralize North Korea's nuclear facility and missiles and show our strike capabilities. Some of the U.S. military plans may not be something you see. They could involve more cyber strikes. They also could take take place underground, inside the tunnels at the complex where North Korea houses its intercontinental ballistic missile components, not far from Pyongyang. The problem is, once the U.S. crosses the 38th parallel, North Korea could launch 800,000 artillery rockets at Seoul within just 4 minutes, Molly.
And as you mentioned, we have some 80,000 troops there in that region. Jennifer Griffin, thank you. We will be checking back with you later on in the show. I'm joined now by California Congressman Brad Sherman. He was the ranking member on the subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific for House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thanks for being here tonight. I want to start by talking about the president, the vice president, this meeting with their national security team and the remarkable words of Secretary of Defense Mattis today. He said, we're not looking to the total annihilation of a country, namely North Korea, but as I said, we have many options to do so. What are the many military options? And in your view, are we getting closer to taking some sort of military action?
I sure hope not. All of our military options are very bad. They either involve some sort of symbolic attack to which North Korea might not respond, or they involve a serious attack in which we would see hundreds of thousands at a minimum of civilian casualties. I think we ought to be looking at economic sanctions, but not the company-by-company sanctions that the president is talking about, but rather country sanctions. Unless we're willing to do that, we ought to simply accept North Korea as a nuclear state, and that makes a much more dangerous world.
Yeah, well, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the finances. Chairman Ed Royce of the House Foreign Affairs Committee today, he issued a statement, and he said the administration should swiftly and utilize authorities provided by Congress to deny Kim Jong-un the cash he needs to fuel his illicit weapons programs. What can Congress do? You have a lot on your plate, but on this issue, what could get done?
I think we would pass additional sanctions if the president asked us, but he already has the authority to turn to China and say, either you do business with North Korea or you do business with the United States, but not both. But that would mean we'd be going eyeball to eyeball with Beijing, and he would have to be able to unite the American people, something he hasn't been able to do. But the best way to just pacify the American people is to sound tough, say you have tough sanctions, and just sanction a few individual companies. That isn't going to make us any safer, but it will make our politicians safer.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin today was doing an interview with Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace, and he talked about drafting a sanctions package that he would be sending to the president. The action would mean anyone who wants to do trade or business with them, meaning North Korea, would be prevented from doing trade or business with us. Now, there's a lot of space between sanctioning additional banks in China and saying no trade. What's your view? Do we go with the sanctioning the banks, coming down on businesses in China and perhaps Russia as well, or something tougher and far broader?
Well, if we just go after individual companies, maybe the 5 largest banks in China won't do business with North Korea, but the 6th will, or the 26th will, or the 26th will open a subsidiary to do so and use a shell corporation. We may make it a little more expensive for North Korea to do business, but we won't actually force that regime to change its behavior. If we're going to sanction if we're going to turn to China and threaten higher tariffs on all of their goods, we're going to need to unite as a country, and the president is going to have to put aside his petty distractions and unite us all as the American people. And we're going to have to turn to Wall Street and say, don't tell us that this is going to hurt your profits. We have to defend the country. I think that's unlikely. What's likely is that we will protect American politicians by sounding tough and not doing very much.
Yeah. Well, what about the international community, pulling together as an international community? UN Secretary Nikki Haley has called this emergency meeting of the UN Security Council slated for tomorrow morning. Is that the way to get something done, something accomplished when it comes to North Korea?
It's a way to symbolically tell the North Koreans that they don't have support anywhere in the world. As long as the sanctions were modest or ephemeral, you could probably get China and Russia to support them. But if we're going to actually do something about this, it's going to require us to prevent all trade between China and North Korea, or at least put that forward as a real prospect. If we can't do that, then we're going to have future decades where North Korea could hit American cities, either with missiles or by smuggling weapons into the United States, which is not that difficult. Marijuana dealers are smuggling things into the United States all the time.
When you talk about further sanctions on North Korea, there's still the potential for illicit trade with North Korea. For instance, the smuggling of weapons out to other countries that might want them, like Iran. Does that make that situation more likely or more dangerous?
Well, you're not going to be able to isolate North Korea 100%. If you could isolate them 70%, you would cause them to be willing to negotiate not the nuclear disarmament. That can't be achieved through negotiations, but rather a limitation on their nuclear program and inspections of everything they're doing, a freezing of their development of further nuclear weapons, a freezing of missile tests, in return for American concessions that American politicians don't want to make. But the fact is that we might have to scale back our joint exercises with South Korea. We might have to officially promise the Chinese that under no circumstances will American troops be north of the 38th parallel. These are things that American politicians don't want to do.
All right, Congressman Sherman, thank you for your take on things on this holiday weekend. Thanks for joining us. Next, an insider's take on all of this. I will talk with a former CIA Deputy Division Chief for Korea. You will hear his insight on the region and what he makes of this latest threat from Kim Jong-un. Our live coverage of this breaking story continues in just a moment on Fox Report. The United States talking tough with North Korea tonight after a hydrogen bomb test, North Korea's most powerful nuclear test to date. With me now, Bruce Klingner, who is a senior research fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation and a former CIA Deputy Division Chief for Korea. Thank you so much for joining us, Bruce. We appreciate it. You know, you have a unique experience with this part of the world. What are your thoughts now with this recent, most powerful test?
It certainly is quite a breakthrough for North Korea. They claim to have tested a hydrogen bomb a year ago, but most of us thought that they had not yet achieved that it perhaps was a boosted fission, sort of a atomic weapon on steroids. So even though they'd been bragging about this, sort of once again, they actually have what they claim to have had.
Now, we were looking there in the side shot at pictures of Kim Jong-un, apparently, or the state media would have us believe that he is helping to inspect this warhead, a warhead that could be placed on an ICBM, potentially something that could hit the United States. We've seen this rather swift advancement in recent years. Why are we seeing so much action and more successes on the part of this regime and their weapons program, whereas before we had seen so many failures?
Well, I think we need to distinguish between the missiles that are deployed and the missiles that are in development. The missiles that are deployed, when they've been launching them, they're not tests, they're exercising the war plan that Kim Jong-un had put in place when he came into power. And those have a very high success rate. Those missiles that are in development, in a way similar to the many failures the U.S. had in the early years of its space and missile program, the ones in development have had failures until now they've been achieving far greater successes. So particularly in the last 2 years, they've had breakthroughs in their submarine launched ballistic missile, 2 different intermediate range missiles that can target U.S. bases in Guam, and then the successful 2-for-2 ICBM tests in July, and now a thermonuclear or hydrogen bomb.
And it is believed to be the most powerful yet. Just for some perspective on that, there was a test back in September 2016. They think the yield there was 10 to 20 kilotons. This 9.8 times more powerful. So really a significant advancement. When we look at some of these pictures, you know, Kim Jong-un is smiling. He's pointing at this warhead with presumably some of the scientists or some of the folks that had helped to develop it. So often he's spoken about as someone who's maniacal and irrational. Is that the case?
Well, many people have said he's crazy, just as they said his father was crazy. You know, he's a brutal, awful dictator, but he's not crazy, nor was his father. We did studies on the father when I was in the government. You know, many people have advocated a preventative attack where even though we don't feel North Korea is about to attack us, we need to, in essence, start a war to prevent a war based on the idea that he's crazy and that he may wake up someday and push the button. But then when I say, well, you know, despite him not being crazy, but how would he respond if we were to attack first? Most say, well, he knows he can't stand up to the might of the U.S. military. It's like, well, so you mean a rational response? So there seems to be I think, a logical disconnect in those those that are advocating starting a war against North Korea.
You know, Secretary of Defense James Mattis had some very strong words today. He said that any threat to the U.S., its territories, including Guam or our allies, would be met with a massive military response. Is now the time for military action? Are we on the cusp of taking some sort of action?
Well, I think it's important to point out that Secretary Mattis's comments, very, very strong, very resolute, but they're clearly in a context of a response to a North Korean attack. And that's consistent with successive administrations' policies where if North Korea or Russia or China or anyone attacks us, we will respond quite firmly. That's different from what we thought we were a couple months ago with the president's comments and comments by National Security Advisor McMaster, which seemed to be suggesting a preventative attack. But then subsequently, senior officials seem to be walking back those comments. So I think although his comments are very strong, they're in response to a North Korean attack.
Yeah, a lot of pieces seem to be moving here. Bruce Klingner, thank you for joining us here tonight. We appreciate it.
And thanks for having me.
Coming up, an expert on North Korea weighs in on possible sanctions and military options. And later, the largest wildfire in Los Angeles history. A state of emergency declared. We will bring you the latest update live from LA. Stay with us. Defense Secretary James Mattis warns North Korea any threat to U.S. allies will be met with a massive military response. So what happens now? Joining me tonight from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, Cliff May. Cliff, that really is the big question. We've seen, the number of options put out on the table, diplomacy, financial actions, or military actions. In your view, what happens now?
Well, I think we don't want to panic. I think what we do want to do is have a plan A, and maybe a plan B and a plan C. For 8 years during the Obama administration, the strategy was called strategic patience. It meant kind of we crossed our fingers and hoped things would get better. That didn't happen. The current administration, I think, understands we can't continue to kick this problem down the road for the next 4 years. So probably the next thing we're going to see are the use of economic weapons that we haven't utilized so far. Probably, and I would think this would be a good idea, starting with serious sanctions against any companies, against any banks, any individuals that do business with North Korea in any way. If they want to do that, they can, but then they can't do business with the U.S. Cut North Korea off as well from the U.S. dollar and begin to put real pressure on China, because I think a strategic approach demands that we persuade China that North Korea is not an asset, but rather a liability. They don't think that yet, but they may be getting closer, and we need to make that argument and show that that's the case.
Yeah, digging down on the financial aspect of this, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin was on Fox News Sunday. He talked about drafting a sanctions package, and the president actually tweeted on this today as well, saying the United States is considering, in addition to other options, stopping all trade with any country doing business with North Korea. That, of course, puts China in the crosshairs of that strategy. So is that realistic?
Well, you certainly start with the companies and the banks and cutting North Korea from the dollars. You start to make it clear to China that we can't do business as usual while North Korea, its client, who 90% of its economy depends on China, while they are threatening us, making the world more dangerous for us, while they are lobbing missiles over Japan, while they are threatening the U.S. mainland. There are other things you can do to make China understand that this is going to be a problem for them. Japan could be a nuclear power itself. China, I don't think, wants that to be the case. We can do a lot more with missile defense in the region, and we should have, in general, been doing more with missile defense over the past 8 years. We have the technology, we haven't deployed it, to make sure that a missile fired anywhere in the world cannot hit its target. We should deploy that technology. Now, that doesn't cut off every means of delivering a nuclear weapon. We still have a problem with this regime, which also, by the way, has laborers, essentially slave laborers, thousands of them in various countries around the world. We should be telling those countries, you send those laborers back, or you're not doing business with the U.S. either. We can put much more pressure than we have, hasn't been a lot, on North Korea and the Chinese. If that fails, well, then we will have to take more extreme steps. Mr. Mattis talked about that a little bit. They're looking at the military options. We don't want to utilize them. I hope the Pentagon is being creative on that score.
The president very often has talked about China and taking a route through China. Today, he also tweeted about South Korea saying South Korea is finding, as I have told them, that their talk of appeasement with North Korea will not work. They only understand one thing. What is that one thing that the president is talking about, and why go after South Korea right now? Because they are literally the ones in the crosshairs in this back and forth.
I think the case he's making to South Korea is that the one thing Kim Jong-un and the regime understands, but certainly this young dictator understands, is force, is power, nothing else. And I think he believes that the South Koreans have been too eager to see if they can't cut a deal. Deals have been cut with the North Koreans many times, starting with the 1994 agreed framework, which President Clinton said would stop North Korea from ever getting nuclear weapons or the means to deliver it. That failed. And other presidents, Republican and Democrat, have failed after that in trying to reason with the young dictator. That has not worked. I think that what President Trump is saying is we have to show him that we have power, that we're not afraid to use it, and that he shouldn't push us too far.
Yeah, and this is an administration that has set all options around the table. Cliff May, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Molly.
Our live coverage of the growing standoff between the United States and North Korea is back in a moment. Plus, we will go live to the flood zone. News stories of rescues, recovery, and incredible resilience from hurricane-battered Texas. Back in a moment.
There's a new
I'm Molly Line, and this is the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour. If you're joining us, Defense Secretary Mattis threatening a, quote, overwhelming response after North Korea claims to have tested a hydrogen bomb. With me now, Dr. John Park, director of the Korea Working Group at the Harvard Kennedy School. Doctor, thanks for joining us. To start things off, we've seen tremendous advancements out of North Korea and their weapons program just in the last 2 years. There was a lot of talk about sanctions, about going after the Chinese banks, or perhaps doing something far greater like halting trade. Can any of those actions keep up with the speed at which the weapons program in North Korea seems to be moving forward?
Well, Molly, there is a lot of emphasis on that route of more sanctions and different types of sanctions. But if you look at the state of the North Korean program and the development, as you mentioned, we're looking at a pace and a scope of the development that is quite startling. And when you look at the measures that potentially are on the table, the concern is that North Korea has done a lot of the development, securing of supply, securing of inventory for its WMD, nuclear and ballistic missile development, where those measures may be too late. So it's not a function of those measures not being effective. It's the timing in comparison to where North Korea is with its program.
How much is the United States, really the international community, willing to see as far as advancements go out of North Korea?
Well, this is a part where we're actually entering a psychological space here. The United States has experience of deterring and containing other nuclear states, peer states. These are other great powers that have a nuclear ICBM type of capability. But in the history of international relations, it's unprecedented for a country of a little over 20 million, led by a single leader who is believed to be about 34 years old, having this capability. So this notion of living with a nuclear North Korea, and frankly, a North Korea that is run by this individual, that's a part that we're having this headway type of discussion of how we deal with it.
You know, presidents in the past have been confounded by this issue. The administrations, the Clinton administration, the Obama administration, the Bush administration. What can the Trump administration do that hasn't already been tried? And President Trump is a more unconventional leader. He ran an unconventional campaign. He got elected. Could we see something different coming out of the Trump administration?
I think what we are seeing coming out of the administration, and what is likely to come out as well, is anticipated by North Korea. That's a part of their planning. The area that is really the next step is more robust ballistic missile defense systems in the region. The idea of North Korea being so close, they're on the cusp of nuclear ICBM, is mating a nuclear warhead to a delivery system that could range the continental United States. That's a part of their strategic game plan, something called Pyeongjin in North Korean parlance. So we're at this situation where the immediate step would be bolstering these ballistic missile defense capabilities in the region.
Well, we know that our THAAD missile defense system has been deployed there in South Korea, and we've been running a variety of various working groups with the Japanese and also with the South Koreans. So there has been a show of force that everyone seems to be getting ready or being prepared. Is that where we are? Are we ready? Are we prepared? And are our allies prepared as well?
Well, ballistic missile defense capabilities have been in the development phase for a while, and they've been deployed in key areas for a while also. But with ballistic missile defense, you need to practice, and you need to have the type of capabilities to respond very quickly. So this is an area where there needs to be more work, and also the North Koreans have the capability of launching simultaneous missiles. So this is an area where it's going to be a priority focus, but as I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of work ahead as well.
Yeah, it's an important topic. Dr. John Park, thank you for joining us on this holiday weekend. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Coming up, the latest on the largest fire in Los Angeles history, evacuations and a state of emergency declared. Plus, cleanup continues after the devastating flooding left in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, and a look ahead at the next storm barreling towards the East Coast, what you need to know about Hurricane Irma. Straight ahead. Hundreds of people in California evacuated from their homes, forced to escape as a monster inferno described as the largest in Los Angeles history. California Governor Jerry Brown has reportedly declared a state of emergency, allowing for state and federal assistance to be provided there to those Los Angeles County residents. And quickly, let's go now to Anita Vogel, who is in Los Angeles with the latest on this. Anita.
Well, hi there, Molly. Heat records are being shattered up and down the California coast, and a string of fires is forcing people from their homes. Here in Southern California, just north of downtown, the La Tuna fire has grown overnight to 5,900 acres, causing hundreds of mandatory evacuations in places like Burbank and Glendale. More than 1,000 firefighters from the surrounding area are battling the blaze on the ground and in the air with air tankers and water-dropping helicopters. Amazingly, so far, only 3 homes have been lost.
I thought they had it under control, and then all of a sudden my neighbor said, "It's coming." And we look, and the whole ridge is on fire.
You could feel the heat from this far, and I mean, the smoke that I could see back there is probably about just under a half a mile away, and we could feel how intense the flames were.
Well, the goal is to protect lives and property. And our priority is to put our firefighters in a position to protect lives and property. Where fire is burning up to a ridge line and there's no property up there, we're going to let it burn.
Farther north up the coast, in the normally lush Pacific Northwest, a lack of rain this summer combined with high temperatures set the scene for dozens of wildfires in Oregon. Large plumes of smoke forced the closure of some campgrounds over the holiday weekend, and at least 150 hikers got trapped by the fire and were stranded overnight. And we're seeing temperatures in the triple digits in places that are usually cool this time of year. In San Francisco, residents usually refer to the month of August as Foggust. But on September 1st, the mercury went way up, hitting a whopping 106 yesterday, shattering the old record. The first break from the heat could come over the next few days when the temperatures are supposed to cool down a bit. Now, as for the La Tuna fire here in L.A., officials say they don't yet know the cause of the blaze, but they are confident with cooler temperatures in the forecast, they're going to make major progress over the next few days, and hopefully all those evacuees will be able to go home. Molly, back to you.
Anita Vogel, thank you. As Texas continues to clean up in the wake of Harvey, Hurricane Irma could bring some more potential problems in the coming days. We will get the latest on that next storm coming up in a moment. But first, let's go to Fox team coverage back in Texas, starting with Steve Harrigan. He is in West Houston, just outside of that mandatory evacuation zone. Steve.
Molly, the water is just not going away in parts of West Houston. It's actually going down just about an inch a day in some places because they continue to have controlled releases from the reservoirs. They are afraid that these earthen dams built in the 1940s could give way. If you take a look behind me, this is Beltway 8. This is a main commercial artery, a main road that goes all around the city of Houston. You can see it's 12 feet underwater. That's the ceiling there at 16 feet. It's almost hitting that. This is going to be an incredible mess for commuters for the next 2 weeks to come. We've heard a lot about damaged houses, but there could be up to 1 million cars destroyed by this flood. A lot of them still underwater, probably several of them right here off to my right. The flooding continues in a number of Houston neighborhoods. We've been seeing people pull out what they can. They either take their valuables on small boats or rafts or pull stuff out of the house like dry wood just to try and sort out what they can, salvage whatever they can. In the mandatory evacuated neighborhoods, there's real concern about looting. There have not been a lot of reports of looting, but you can see signs out in front where there's not police cars already posted warning that looters will be shot. Molly, back to you.
All right, Steve Harrigan, there are folks there defending their property. Let's go now to Rick Leventhal, who is in Beaumont, Texas. Rick.
And Molly, there are some small signs of progress here in Beaumont, including the water starting to recede here on the north end, but there is still too much of it. As you can see, there are vehicles buried and homes still waterlogged, as well as a number of churches here on Pine Street. The one issue that they're dealing with more than any other is a difficulty with running water because the water treatment facility was flooded. The mayor told us today that they were able to temporarily fix that problem with a series of plastic pipes and an auxiliary pump system to reroute the water through the filtration system. And she says that many homes here do now have running water, but it's not safe to drink. So there is a boil water order in effect, and they're hoping that within the next week or two there will be safe water for all these residents to use. The other issue that you can tell from this neighborhood certainly is a lack of power. Some 7,000 homes as of today were still in the dark, and the power company said that it would restore power to most of those homes except the ones that are surrounded by water or where the equipment is surrounded by water. The other issue they're dealing with is a lack of drinkable water and food that's now being passed out along with bags of ice at a number of distribution points across the city of Beaumont, 3 that we visited today, where residents were lining up in their cars to get a case of water and a case of MREs, the meals ready to eat, as well as a bag of ice. They were passing them out, roughly 6,000 of them in one day. And the folks that we talked to seem to be handling all of this pretty well.
This is the first time, and I hate that we're all going through this, but I know they said a lot of the guys are out there really working, trying to get things going. I cut on the water at my sister's house, and it's dripping, you know. I think just enough to take a little warm bath, because going without a bath is horrible. But we Texas strong, 409, we got this.
It's rough. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Water is what we need right here. Water and the food.
It's been a chore, but we will survive. We will get through this. We're Texas strong.
A number of roads remain impassable in Beaumont tonight, and the police and National Guard doing double duty, Molly.
The emotional, the psychological strength there, just incredible. Rick Leventhal, thanks for sharing their stories. Now let's go to Fox News meteorologist Adam Klotz in the Extreme Weather Center, who is the latest on Harvey. And of course, a look ahead at what is in store from Irma. All eyes on that. Adam?
Hey, Molly. Yeah, Irma is going to be a huge one, but beginning here with Harvey, I know folks in the Northeast, perhaps at least to now pushing up into portions of Maine, very heavy downpour. This is all the remnants of Harvey. I know a lot of folks in New York City woke up early this morning and had that rain continuing to fall down. It's still moving off to the north and the east, eventually going to leave the region, but that is what this particular